Hey guys, tonight we dive quite literally into a chapter of history that most beach documentaries politely skip. You're standing barefoot on a windswept medieval shore. The sun is low and gold, the breeze sharp with salt, and waves roll in like ancient drums. But you're not here to tan. There's no sunblock, no lifeguard, and definitely no bikinis. You're wrapped head to toe in linen, trying to figure out how to bathe in the sea without revealing an inch of skin. You bend to feel the chill tide lapping against your ankles and immediately regret everything. That water is *freezing*. There's no waterproof fabric, no quick dry tech, just the thick, scratchy underlayer of your everyday chemise, now growing heavier with each splash. And you're not alone. Other women, nobles, and peasants alike pace awkwardly along the edge, their modesty more burdensome than the waves themselves. It's the Middle Ages, somewhere between the 5th and 15th centuries, depending on who's keeping score. And women's bathing, whether in bathhouses or the open sea, is a tightly choreographed dance of custom, class, and caution. Forget surfboards and string bikinis. Tonight, your wardrobe is a full-body obstacle course. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you watching from? And what time is it where you are? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge further into the shallows, trying not to trip over your own waterlogged hem. There's no such thing as casual beachwear yet. In fact, there's no concept of swimwear at all. You wear what you wear every other day, undergarments made of linen or wool, maybe layered for warmth or decency, maybe patched where fabric was scarce. But here, those same layers act like anchors. Some sources suggest that women may have worn a single shift-along, loose garment much like a nightgown. Not for elegance, for modesty. You're here to bathe, sure, but not to bear. Public nudity, even partial, especially female, could result in scandal, accusations, and spiritual consequences. You're not getting tan lines, you're dodging eternal damnation. There were, of course, rivers and lakes where women could wash privately. But the sea, that's different. Open, vast, alive, and powerful in more ways than one. Some believed that salt water had healing powers, balm for the body, cleanser for the soul. Others believed it could strip away protection, expose the vulnerable, tempt the unseen. Historians still argue whether sea bathing in the Middle Ages was a routine act for common women or a rare luxury for those with status. But one thing is clear. When it happened, it was anything but casual. And don't imagine this was fun in the modern sense. There were no colorful umbrellas, no squeaky coolers or volleyball games in the distance. The medieval shoreline was a place of work, of rituals, of boundaries, especially for women. You didn't just frolic. You entered the sea with purpose, and usually with prayer. But if you squint through the salty mist and imagine harder, maybe you can see the gentle curve of a woman's form beneath her shift as she moves carefully through the waves. Maybe you catch a laugh, quick, nervous, and quickly muffled. Maybe there's joy here too, deep beneath the starch and suspicion. And then you hear it, the sharp whistle of a nearby nun, or the barking of a beach warden. Yes, those existed in some towns, or even the disapproving cluck of another bather. You're showing too much ankle. Or maybe your shift has gone transparent. Linen does that, you know, especially when wet. You scramble to adjust, your teeth chattering, your arms flailing under the now gelatinous weight of soaked cloth. And you wonder why even come here. Because sometimes, despite the rules, despite the discomfort, despite the disapproving eyes, the sea is freedom. Even when you can barely breathe in your wet clothes, even when you're expected to emerge holier or cleaner or more compliant, you get a moment. A moment where the waves lift you, carry you, and forget your name. And just before we leave this first frosty chapter, here's a fact to soak on. In some port cities, like medieval Venice, sea bathing wasn't just tolerated, it was encouraged. Doctors recommended saltwater immersion to treat female weaknesses and emotional imbalances. That's right, your ocean dip was medical. And for our quirky fact, in some fishing villages, women believed that bathing in the sea on the summer solstice could increase fertility, especially if done naked under moonlight. Just don't get caught. But we'll get to that in later waves. The tide is rising, and so are the unspoken rules. You're still at the edge of the medieval sea, cold water tugging at your ankles. But you're not just battling the elements or navigating centuries of social customs, taboos, and religious oversight. You haven't even made it waist deep, and already your every move is under scrutiny. Because in the Middle Ages, bathing, especially sea bathing, wasn't just a physical act. It was a moral performance. Let's start with the most obvious regulation. Asterisk asterisk, who gets to bathe, where and when asterisk asterisk. You're a woman, which means you don't simply waltz into the water whenever you feel like it. The beach is not a public playground, it's a tightly monitored stage. Women are often confined to certain hours, specific locations, and always with a solid expectation of modesty. If the men bathe in the morning, you might be granted the afternoon if you're lucky, and if the tide isn't too rough. The idea of mixed bathing men and women sharing the same seawater at the same time is largely off the table. Not just frowned upon, scandalous, immoral, dangerous. Even in towns where bathing was common, the genders were segregated more sharply than a monastery dining hall. Even the ocean had a curfew for women. The reason? Modesty, yes, but also control. Women's bodies were viewed as spiritually fragile and socially volatile. Too much exposure, and you might tempt someone. Too much visibility, and you might be judged. A flash of calf in the wrong century could cause an entire coastal village to combust into gossip. There's also the issue of class. You, trudging along in your scratchy linen shift, might be a fisherman's daughter, or a merchant's wife. Your garments mark your place, and even your presence on the beach might be seen as presumptuous if the noble women are nearby. And those noble women, they don't wade in. They arrive with attendants and parasols, and possibly a wooden bathing box. We'll get to those later. You just try not to trip on a rock while everyone watches. Historians still argue whether sea bathing was more accepted in southern coastal regions like the Mediterranean, compared to the chillier and stricter north. Some believe Italian and Iberian women had more freedom, more access to secluded beaches, and perhaps more relaxed local customs. Others suggest that, regardless of geography, bathing remained cloaked in expectation and judgment. Of course, there were exceptions. There always are. Let's meet one. Hildegard, the miller's niece. Not famous, not royal, but let's say she lived in a coastal town in 13th century Normandy. Hildegard didn't care much for rules. Every Thursday at dawn, while the beach patrol still snored in their towers, she'd sneak down to the shallows, clutching a length of spare linen she'd pretended was a drying cloth. She'd wrap it around her chest, wade into the tide, and just for 10 minutes float, eyes to the sky, salt in her mouth. No judgment, no lectures, just water, and every week, without fail, she'd get caught. Once by her aunt, once by a passing priest, once by an actual goose. That's right, a very territorial goose that honked so loudly the entire village came out to watch her sprint half-naked through the dunes. And yet, she came back, every time, because even a goose can't stop a girl who just wants to feel clean and free. Of course, freedom in the Middle Ages was relative. You're not just worrying about modesty. You're also thinking about why you're here. Bathing, in this era, is often medical, spiritual, or mandated. It's not pleasure, it's penance or prescription. And if a local physician has suggested a sea immersion to cool your humors, well, you're expected to obey even if it means dunking yourself in front of the whole town. Now, here's your quirky tidbit for this round. Some medieval texts suggested that if women spent too long in cold water, it could cause forgetfulness, confusion of speech, or even loss of virtue. That last part, open to interpretation, but medieval scholars were very concerned that cold seawater might loosen morals. Or, mess with your Latin. So, there were rules. Bath by the book, or else. And there were watchers. In some cities, religious officials appointed moral overseers tasked with observing public conduct. They weren't just concerned with prayer. They watched how you walked, dressed, and yes, bathed. If your shift clung too tightly, if you laughed too loudly, if you floated in a way that could be construed as joyful, you risked a warning, or worse. And yet, despite all this, the stares, the shame, the salt in your eyes, women kept returning to the sea. Because deep down, somewhere beneath the veils and the fears, there was a recognition that salt water could do something no priest or doctor ever quite could. Restore. There's something primal about submerging your body in the same ocean that touched ancient ships, that held fish and gods and forgotten kingdoms. Even if you had to do it in 3 layers of fabric and under the supervision of a nosy friar. And so, you lower yourself slowly, water climbing your waist, your sleeves dragging like seaweed. You hold your breath, the wind whistles, a gull screams above, your shift balloons round you like a jellyfish, and you think just for a second that maybe the sea doesn't care about the rules. Maybe. In this moment, neither do you. You're waist deep now, and the water clutches at your dress like a mischievous child. It's pulling, twisting, clinging in all the wrong places, and you're starting to feel like a walking sack of wet laundry. But this is no wardrobe malfunction. This is the wardrobe. Welcome to the medieval world of sea bathing attire. Not fashion, not swimwear, just clothes that happen to get soaked. Forget bikinis. Forget one pieces, or even anything designed with buoyancy in mind. In the Middle Ages, you bathe in what you already wear, your chemise, also called a shift. It's a simple, full-length linen garment worn beneath your regular clothes. Think of it as a cross between a nightgown and a cloth ghost. Modest, yes. Comfortable, not once it's full of seawater. You lift your arms, trying to peel the fabric away from your torso, but it slaps back like a wet sail. The linen clings everywhere. It's translucent now. To so much for modesty. You glance down. No men. Good. But that doesn't mean you're alone. There's always someone watching. That's why many women layered up, adding wool petticoats, outer shifts. Even aprons, yes. Aprons over their base layer. Not because they wanted to sink faster, but because modesty in medieval Europe wasn't just about not being naked . It was about not being perceived . You weren't just covering skin, you were concealing shape. Some ladies even tied cords under their busts to prevent the chemise from floating upward and exposing their bodies. A wet chemise had a reputation. It hinted . It clung, and if that cling was seen as too revealing, well, you got yourself a one-way ticket to ecclesiastical scolding. Historians still argue whether there were regional differences in how women approached these makeshift bathing garments. In warmer Mediterranean climates, the linen might be thinner, shorter, or even skipped altogether during solo dips. But up north, in Britain or Scandinavia, you bet your freezing legs they layered. The sea was no joke. And for noble women, things got stranger. Picture this. A countess arrives at the beach in a wheeled cart, veiled and robed, followed by handmaidens carrying extra shifts and baskets of towels. She doesn't just wade in. She's prepared . Some even changed into a second, older chemise once specifically meant for bathing, because heaven forbid the salt water damage the fine linen woven by Flemish nuns. Here's your quirky fact of the night. Some women used *** weighted hems ** in their shifts to keep the fabric from floating up and revealing their legs. That's right, so a few stones into the bottom and boom, problem solved. Unless, of course, you sink. And sink they sometimes did. There are scattered reports, though often more folkloric than factual, of women drowning during sea bathing because their clothes became too heavy. Whether or not this was common is up for debate. But the fear was real. Wet wool weighs a ton. A triple-layered outfit soaked in seawater could drag you under faster than your prayers could bubble up. So, some women avoided the sea altogether and took to the shore, content to let the tide wash over their feet while they pretended to be enthusiastic. Others went in groups, forming circles, holding hands, laughing cautiously. Safety in numbers, or at least dignity in numbers. You squint toward a cluster of these bathers, now 5 or 6 women, all ages, all awkwardly bobbing in place. One of them has tied a scarf round her neck so tight she can barely breathe. Another has pinned her chemise at the shoulders with iron brooches sure to rust by sundown. And one, bold as brass, has dared to go without sleeves entirely. You gasp, not from judgment, but from awe. Sleeveless sea bathing. In this century, she's either revolutionary or very tired of laundry. And laundry, by the way, is a big reason why most women didn't treat sea bathing as a casual event. You couldn't just toss your soak shift in a washing machine. You had to wring it out, scrub it on stone, dry it in the sun, and hope it didn't mildew. Bathing came with chores. That's why, in many communities, bathing, whether in sea or river, was part of a broader *** weekly ritual ***. You might bathe on Saturdays, before Sunday church, or on the summer solstice, as part of an old pagan custom now disguised as Christian cleansing. You didn't just dip in, you observed the moment. Sometimes with prayer, sometimes with dread, and sometimes with goose fat. Yes, tonight's strangest fringe fact. In certain parts of Northern Europe, it was believed that rubbing goose fat on your limbs before sea bathing would prevent cramps, chills, and demons. Nobody is quite sure how goose fat became a medieval cure-all, but imagine the smell. You're slippery, shiny, and vaguely poultry-scented, basically a roast waiting to happen. You try to shake off the image as a breeze slices across the water. Your chemise clings tighter. Your skin prickles. Your dignity hangs by a thread, and the thread is unraveling. You start to retreat, stumbling backward toward the shore, feet sinking into the sand, your arms outstretched like a linen draped scarecrow. You're soaked, chilled, and suddenly aware of how much you miss dry clothes. But you also feel something else, a strange kind of release, a freedom, buried beneath the absurdity of sea-soaked shifts and weighted hems. You did it. You bathed in the medieval sea. You didn't drown. You didn't flash. And nobody's thrown a stone or a scripture at you. Not yet. That breeze again. It lifts the edge of your hem and carries with it something delicate, pride. Even wrapped in wet linen, you've moved with the tide, survived the drag, and stayed afloat in a world that often demanded you sink. You step onto the pebbled shore, feet squelching, hemline dripping, and with every step, your wet chemise slaps against your knees like a dampness rag. The wind tugs at your soaked garments, but there's no time to shiver. You're already being pulled into something bigger than just the tide. See, the sea isn't just a body of water in the Middle Ages. It's a threshold, a place where the sacred and the ordinary collide. And the act of bathing in it, especially for women, carries traces of something older than modesty or medicine. Something ancient, something whispering beneath the waves. You might not realize it now, as you squish up the beach like a soggy parchment scroll. But many of the bathing customs you're participating in didn't start in the medieval world at all. They're the hand-me-downs of older traditions, Roman, Celtic, Germanic, and yes, deeply pagan in flavor. In ancient times, long before shifts and sleeves, bathing was sacred. People believed water had spirits, that lakes and springs had moods, that rivers remembered your sins and the sea could swallow your grief. Women, in particular, were seen as being closer to water through birth, blood, and body, and so their sea bathing became part ritual, part rite of passage. You trudge past a group of older women standing in a loose circle, mumbling a chant you barely recognize. It's probably just a hymn. Or maybe it's older. Maybe it's a local version of a midsummer rite, one where women stood knee-deep in seawater, braided seaweed into their hair, and whispered their fears to the horizon. Historians still argue whether these pagan customs were completely stamped out by the church by the 12th century, or if they lingered in quiet corners transformed into acceptable behavior under a Christian lens. You know, like cleansing rituals that looked suspiciously like fertility blessings. And here's the kicker. Even the church couldn't resist the sea's allure. Certain seaside monasteries allowed nuns to bathe, though rarely together and always under strict supervision. In some places, convents had access to secluded inlets where bathing could take place under cover of rocks and silence. It's ironic, isn't it? The very institutions that enforced modesty also made space for a water's mystery. Take the case of the Holy Women of Kent, a group of semi-legendary Anglo-Saxon women believed to have waded into the sea once a year on the feast of St. Thulba. Their goal, not hygiene, not penance, but prophecy. Supposedly, the behavior of the tide told them whether war was coming, or whether a royal marriage would hold. Sounds suspiciously like divination with a dash of drama. The church, of course, denied everything. And yet, in art and story, women and water were always entwined. Think of mermaids, think of water nymphs, think of the Lady of the Lake herself offering up Excalibur, soaked to the elbow and mysteriously dry at the same time. These weren't just stories. They were reflections of a truth too slippery to pin down. Tonight's quirky tidbit. In coastal Brittany, well into the late medieval period, women would sometimes enter the sea backwards on the eve of a wedding. Why? To confuse malevolent spirits. Apparently, if the demons saw you walking away, they'd assume you were leaving and wouldn't follow you into marriage. It's basically spiritual ghosting. You pause near a tide pool, watching tiny crabs scuttle sideways. The air is heavy with brine, and the horizon glows with the last rays of medieval sun. You can feel the oldness here, not just the age of the rocks, but of the customs. There's a story that's still told, faint and local, about a noble woman named Lady Elswith of Dorset. Once a year, at dawn, she would walk alone to the shore, wrap herself in an undyed linen robe, and wade silently into the water. Her attendants weren't allowed to speak or follow. She never explained. Some said it was penance. Others said she was mourning. But a few whispered that her mother had been a sea priestess before the priest part got edited out by history. Lady Elswith did this for 20 years, and the year she didn't, a storm wrecked 3 ships in the bay. Coincidence? Probably. But you don't look at the water the same after hearing it. Because even now, with the church whispering in your ear and society tugging at your sleeves, you feel something primal pulling at your ankles. Something that makes you want to wade in deeper, to let the waves lift you, to stop pretending you understand what the sea wants from you. There are rules, yes, but the sea remembers before there were rules. And that's what tonight's real insight is. Sea bathing, for medieval women, wasn't just about hygiene or health. It was a quiet, often defined preservation of something older, a ritual without a script, a tradition that moved like waves, forward, backward, never quite still. You climb a dune, squinting at the now distant water. A group of younger girls are laughing, splashing, shrieking. their camises balloon like sails, their voices echoing across the beach. And for a second, they look like every generation of women who ever dared to meet the ocean on their own terms. Their laughter isn't just joy, it's survival. You linger at the edge of the dunes, watching the waves roll in like they've been doing since the world was young. And though your shift is clinging to your body like wet parchment, you can't help but feel oddly light. Not because your clothes have dried, they absolutely have not, but because, somehow, you've made it through your first medieval sea bath without losing your dignity, your soul, or your sandals. But don't get too comfortable. If you think you're afraid to enjoy the water now, you're mistaken. Because this next part of the medieval seaside experience, it's not about the water at all. It's about the walls, invisible ones between you and the people you're forbidden to swim near. That's right. Gender segregation wasn't just a suggestion, it was practically law in many coastal towns, especially those with any sort of religious influence. Mixed bathing, scandalous, improper, the gateway to temptation, apparently. And women bore the brunt of the consequences. You look to your left and you see them, the men. Not close, of course. They're further down the beach, near the rocks, where a loose rope line divides their patch of sea from yours. They're shirtless, laughing, diving into the waves like seals with no moral consequences. You can't even lift your chemise above your knees without risk of a lecture or a lashing. It wasn't always this way, though. Historians still argue whether gendered bathing areas were a medieval invention or a holdover from Roman customs. Some scholars point to ancient bathhouses in Europe where men and women were separated by hour or day. Others argue it was Christianity's tightening grip on bodily modesty that drove the real wedge. Either way, by the Middle Ages, beaches were segregated like sanctuaries, and the policing of this line, ferocious. In some towns, beach guardians think medieval lifeguards with less muscle and more moral outrage patrol the shores, watching for anyone who dared cross into the wrong patch of water. Offenders could be fined, publicly shamed, or even excommunicated. Yes, excommunication for a splash too far. And what counted as mixed bathing varied wildly. A brother and sister swimming together, probably fine. Two cousins, tread carefully. A stranger of the opposite sex floating within 50 feet. Scandal. Cover your eyes. Boil the sea. It wasn't just about propriety, it was about control. Women's bodies were seen as volatile vessels, always on the brink of causing spiritual chaos. The sea, unpredictable and amiable. Combine the two, and it's basically alchemy gone wrong. Which is why even married couples rarely bathed together, not even in private. Sea bathing wasn't romantic. It wasn't intimate. It was *regulated*. You weren't allowed to enjoy it too much or at all, ideally. And yet, there were rebels. Meet Marguerite of Lubeck, fisherman's daughter, local legend. One warm July morning in the year 1392, she snuck past the ropes and swam, in full view of the men's bathing area, all the way to the breakwater. Did she wear a modest shift? No, she wore *red*1, practically a bullseye. Word spread in minutes. The beach guardian dropped his scroll. Several priests dropped their lunch. One fisherman supposedly dropped his net and let an entire barrel of herring escape. Was she punished? Absolutely. Shamed relentlessly. But did the town also start using her name as a swear word shorthand for daring behavior? Oh yes, don't go pulling a Marguerite. They'd whisper to girls who looked a little too brave. You're a quirky tidbit tonight. In one coastal village in Ireland, there was a legend that if a man accidentally saw a woman bathing, he had to marry her or face a curse. Every fish he caught for the next 7 years would be boneless. Yes, no one really understood why that was a curse, or how it worked, but it kept eyes politely averted. And yet, for all these rules and rituals, human curiosity never fully dies. Not then, not now. Sometimes it was a glance across the rope line, a shared laugh over the sea breeze, A wink from someone ankle-deep in forbidden territory. And sometimes, rarely, daringly a woman would wander too close. Just a few steps, just until the foam touched her toes. Close enough to hear the laughter, to remember she wasn't made of linen and laces alone. And for those who risked it, the thrill wasn't always about romance. It was about reclaiming space, about saying, quietly but firmly, "This sea doesn't belong to the rules, and neither do I. You sit now on a flat, sun-warm stone, wringing out the sleeves of your chemise. The sea glistens before you, golden in the light, and the division line rope, rocks, or rumor feels as silly as it is sacred. Because when the waves come in, they don't stop at the border. They roll over the rules. They touch everyone. And tonight, you'll remember that. Long after you're dry, long after the sun sets behind medieval rooftops, and your shift is hung to out on a line, you'll remember that you stood in water that didn't ask who you were allowed to swim with. It just let you float. You returned to the beach the next morning, your shift a little less stiff from yesterday's salt, your shoulders slightly sun-pinked, and your curiosity as alive as ever. Because today, something's different. You are not here just to bathe. You are here to see, to witness a peculiar shift in medieval thinking. When suddenly, perhaps absurdly, the sea wasn't just a place of spiritual cleansing or modest suffering. It became fashionable. That's right. Welcome to the earliest rumblings of the sea-bathing crazer trend that began to curl along the coasts of Europe like a curious little wave and would, centuries later, turn into a tidal obsession. But even in the Middle Ages, seeds were being planted. You notice it first in the way people were talking. A few noble women murmuring on the dunes. They're not discussing theology or husbands, they're talking about their humors. And the sea, apparently, is supposed to balance them. This isn't idle gossip. It's medical theory. In the medieval worldview, your body is governed by four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Too much of one, illness, depression, even moral decay. And the recommended cure for some of these imbalances: a nice, bone-chilling dunk in the ocean. Sea immersion to turbulence melancholia, they'd say, which sounds suspiciously like, go soak your sadness off. Doctors of the time, usually bearded, grumpy, and more interested in leeches than leisure, began recommending saltwater exposure for various ailments. Women especially were advised to try sea bathing to calm female troubles, hysteria, or even skin blemishes. Of course, the irony is that no one asked the sea for permission. Historians still argue whether these medical recommendations were serious prescriptions or just excuses for noble women to escape their houses. Either way, a few towns began to embrace the idea, and suddenly, the beach had more than just fishwives and barefoot children. It had guests. You overhear a merchant's wife mention how her sister went to the coast for 3 days to improve her complexion. No one blinks. It's becoming a thing. Not exactly a spa weekend, but in the 14th century mindset, pretty close. That shift, no pun intended, turned sea bathing from a burden into a kind of quiet luxury. You can see it in the way the women prepare. They aren't just dragging themselves into the waves like penitents. They're arriving with satchels of herbs, scented oils, special cloths, softer and thinner than the rough utility shifts of commoners. They even bring portable stools to sit on afterward, facing the sun like damp icons of serenity. There's an air of ritual here, of choreography. A lady kneels at the tide's edge, sprinkles lavender on the waves, then dips her hands before entering. It's not magic, not officially, but it's close. You shuffle into the water beside them, trying to act like you, too, have been instructed by a doctor to rebalance your humors. In truth, your humors are mostly just cold and hungry. But the moment your body sinks into that briny coolness, you understand. It does feel curative. Not because of science, because of silence. The sea absorbs your noise. It takes your heavy thoughts, your wool stiffics, your sleepless nights, and swirls them away without a trace. You float, arms out, fabric flowing like seaweed around your legs, and wonder asterisk, is this healing? Asterisk. And here's your quirky tidbit for today. In some monastic infirmaries, salt water was harvested and stored in ceramic jugs, labeled and used like medicine. That's right, bottled sea. You weren't always expected to travel to the beach. Sometimes, the beach came to you. One record even notes a nun at a Welsh convent using waters from the Western Sea to treat what we now suspect was eczema. No word on whether it worked, but the label had a little fish drawn on it. For branding, probably. You glance down at your hand, now pale and wrinkled from salt. The woman beside you holds a mirror up to her own face. Not vanity. Asterisk verification, asterisk. Did the sea fix her? Will she be softer, clearer, calmer? And here's the joke they don't know. Not really, but they believe. And sometimes, that's enough. Of course, not everyone is on board. You hear muttering from an older matron on the shore, arms crossed, cheeks tight with disapproval. She's muttering something about foolish cures for foolish women. And just like that, the mood breaks, because every new fashion has its skeptics. Historians suggest that as bathing slowly gained prestige, especially when tied to medicine, it also drew critics. Some claim sea bathing was indulgent, especially for women. Others warned that it made people soft, morally and physically. A woman caught enjoying herself in the waves might be seen as vain, or worse, idle, and idleness, as medieval preachers loved to remind everyone, was the devil's footstool. Still, the tide turns slowly, and in these rare pockets of change, a small revolution is happening, not in pamphlets or politics, but in posture. Women who once bent their heads to avoid notice now raise them toward the sea breeze, confident in the excuse that this is doctor's orders. You step out, the waves still tugging, the salt biting pleasantly at your skin. Someone hands you a strip of linen soaked in rose water. You dab it on your forehead and inhale. The scent, the sea, the sun, something about it feels intentional, not performative. But asterisk asterisk owned asterisk asterisk. You are not just bathing. You're asterisk asterisk participating asterisk asterisk in a quiet trend that will, one day, rewrite how the world sees women in water. Not as warnings, not as temptresses, but as people with bodies that ache, that heal, and that deserve the sea. The sun rides higher today, casting bright reflections on the sea that dance across your cheeks like flickering coins. You blink against the light and step back into the surf, ankle deep again. Though this time you're not here for beauty or modesty. You're here for healing. Because in the Middle Ages, the sea wasn't just a destination for balance or fashion, it was a pharmacy. A vast, frothy, and predictable cure-all. And for women, especially, sea bathing became tangled in the web of superstition, spiritual belief, and medical desperation. Let's start with something familiar: melancholy. That slippery, moody humor that medieval doctors couldn't quite pin down. A woman who cried too often, melancholy. A woman who didn't cry enough, melancholy. A woman who read too much poetry, definitely melancholy. The remedy: saltwater immersion. The thinking was that the sea, being bitter and cold, would shock the humors back into alignment. You're told to walk slowly into the waves, let the chill bite into your legs, and stay submerged for as long as your nerves allow. That's the exact phrase used by a nun-physician in a 14th century English infirmary. You're not sure how long your nerves allow, but it's not much. And it's not just melancholia. The sea was believed to treat all kinds of female-specific ailments: infertility, hysteria, heavy dreams, even womb wandering. Yes, womb wandering, a deeply medieval idea that a woman's womb could float around her body like a lost balloon, causing all manner of symptoms. So the sea, a sort of briny leash to pull it back into place. Historians still debate whether any of these treatments were genuinely believed by patients, or simply endured because they were prescribed by authority. One theory even suggests that the very act of going to the coast, of being away from chores and family obligations, may have done more to soothe women's minds than the sea itself. A holiday disguised as a hospital visit. You kneel in the shallows, cupping salt water over your face. It stings, it refreshes, it tastes like old stories. Beside you, another woman holds something curious, a small sack of herbs, bound in wool and tied with twine. She dips it in the water, presses it to her neck, then lets the tide carry it away. You ask what it is. She smiles. Lavender and rue, to confuse the bad spirits. Because even while the doctors talked humors and bile, the common folk whispered other reasons for sea bathing. Reasons that had nothing to do with balance and everything to do with fear. Take the case of seaborne curses. It was believed in many coastal regions that the sea could carry malice. If someone had cursed you, accused you of sin, stolen your luck, or simply cast you the wrong kind of glance, you could bathe in salt water on a full moon to wash it away. The ritual was simple. Way out alone, face west, and whisper the name of the one who wronged you as the tide pulled at your feet. You weren't asking the sea to heal you. You were asking it to remember. And it didn't stop there. In some fishing communities, women believed that evil spirits clung to clothing, especially shifts worn during childbirth or illness. So sea bathing wasn't just for skin, it was for laundry. Women would soak their troubled garments in tide pools, then burn them afterward, cleansing by fire and sea. One local superstition claimed that if the cloth hissed in the water, the spirit was leaving. If it floated, it hadn't gone anywhere. Tonight's quirky tidbit. In a medieval village on the Black Sea coast, there was a tradition of women whispering secrets into cockle shells and tossing them into the waves. These truth shells, they believed, would carry their confessions far from shore and out of reach of judgment. Medieval whisper network meets ocean delivery. And what about physical afflictions? Sea bathing was often the last resort for illnesses that no other treatment touched. Skin diseases, swollen joints, rashes, fevers. For women, especially those who couldn't afford a healer, the sea was the poor woman's doctor. If you were lucky, the salt soothed. If you weren't, at least you felt like you'd tried everything. You watch as two young women help an elderly matron into the water, their arms linked, their steps careful. The older woman wears a shift dyed a pale yellow, a color traditionally associated with healing in some regions. They lower her gently, slowly, until she's sitting in the shallows, waves lapping at her knees. She closes her eyes and hums a soft, trembling sound that barely rises over the wind. You don't know what she's praying for, but the way her fingertips trail through the water, it's clear. She's not just hoping to feel better. She's hoping to be heard. That's the real mystery of these superstitions. Not whether they worked, but whether they gave people, especially women, a voice, a place, a ritual they could own, in a world that rarely gave them authority over anything, not even their own bodies. The sea gave them space. Sure, it was cold, often unwelcoming, sometimes deadly, but it didn't talk back. It didn't shame. And when you cried into it, it didn't remember. You rise again, shift clinging, fingers salty. And for the first time, you feel the sea not as scenery but as witness. Not healing you in the way the doctors promise, but in the way stories do. By giving your sorrow somewhere to go. The wind picks up just a little this afternoon, playful rather than cruel. It rustles the edges of your damp shift and tugs gently at your hair, as if the sea is trying to dress you down and help you at the same time. You feel like a medieval windsock. Elegant. But today is different. Because today, you are surrounded by women in motion-adjusting hems, tying sashes, securing head coverings, and all of them are engaging in a quiet battle, How to bathe in the sea without accidentally performing. It's the medieval art of modesty hacks. And believe me, the creativity on display would put modern fashion influencers to shame. For starters, let's talk footwear. Most beachgoers today stroll barefoot in the sand. But medieval women, that's a luxury they can't afford. Not because the sand is too hot, but because the ground is alive. Crabs, barnacles, sharp stones, slippery algae. A beach stroll is practically an obstacle course. So, what do? You wear leather-soled water shoes, sometimes strapped on with hemp, sometimes made of scrap hide patched together from old boots. Historians still argue whether these were common or a sign of status. But some archaeological digs have unearthed partial water-worn soles near coastal settlements too thin for walking far, but perfect for surviving the shore. Then there's the matter of headwear. Imagine you're trying to sea bathe with dignity while wearing a wimple, starched linen wrap that covers your head and neck like a modest medieval hoodie. A wave crashes, and suddenly your wimple has become a sail. It yanks back, tightens across your throat, and threatens to turn you into an accidental martyr. So what do women do? They adapt. Some pin their head coverings into braided hair with hand-forged iron hooks. Others ditch the wimple entirely and substitute straw bonnets tied so tightly under the chin you could ride out a storm. These bonnets aren't the flouncy kind you see in oil paintings. No, these are helmets of modesty. Stiff, angular, reinforced with beeswax and pure stubbornness. And probably the reason so many medieval women had magnificent posture. You see a woman beside you with a clever trick. She's sewn thin pebbles into the hem of her chemise to weigh it down in the water. Not enough to drown her, just enough to prevent it from ballooning up like a linen jellyfish. She catches you watching and grins. "River stones," she says, "blessed by the priest." Or possibly just wet. That's the kind of humor that thrives among women trying to keep their dignity from floating away. And the belt game. Don't get me started. Many women would cinch a braided cord round their waist outside the shift. Not for fashion, for structure. It kept the fabric from flapping inappropriately or, worse, clinging to all the places medieval society told women not to have. Sometimes these belts were just rope. Sometimes they were dyed wool. In rare cases, they bore embroidered charms meant to protect the wearer from sea spirits. Think of them as wet cassettes with a touch of magic. You're a quirky tidbit today. In some parts of the Holy Roman Empire, women would wear cress necklaces, tiny satchels of watercress and thyme to ward off jellyfish stings and, more curiously, male attention. Apparently, the smell was thought to discourage flirtation. Seaweed perfume meets personal space. You walk farther along the beach and catch sight of a group of younger girls practicing synchronized bathing. Yes, synchronized. They wade in together, one hand holding their shifts down, the other linked in a human chain. As the waves roll in, they lift their hems just enough to avoid tripping, then lower them again like a linen curtain. It's part dance, part strategy. They've turned modesty into choreography. It wasn't always about hiding, though. Sometimes, these hacks were about participating without punishment. About finding clever ways to enjoy the sea without breaking the rules or getting dragged to confession. Because make no mistake, wardrobe malfunctions had consequences. If your chemise slipped and revealed too much, it wasn't just embarrassment, it could be interpreted as willful temptation. That was the fear, that a woman might be using the sea not for cleansing, but for seduction. Never mind that she could barely breathe under all that linen. If a hem rode too high, and the wrong eye saw, she could be fined, shamed, or worse, branded as indecent. So women got clever. One story, half legend and half village gossip, tells of a baroness who wore to full shifts sewn together a sort of linen wetsuit. Did it work? Supposedly, yes. Though she caught pneumonia and had to spend the next month in bed wrapped in hot bricks. Still, she maintained her virtue *, and * her reputation. And yet, for all these hacks, the sea still misbehaves. You feel it now. A rogue wave slaps against your thigh and sends your skirt flaring upward. You yelp and grab it just in time, laughing as you nearly tip over sideways. Someone sees. They snort. You both grin like children. Because despite the weight of modesty, the pressure of rules, and the daily risk of linen-based scandal, the sea still brings out a kind of joy. The mischief in the water, the sly rebellion in the wind, and the camaraderie of women trying not to flash anyone while remembering that, deep down, they're still allowed to have fun. You wade out one more time, gathering your shift in both hands, anchoring it with forearms and a prayer. And as the waves pull you forward, you realize something. Modesty might be the rule, but motion is the rebellion. You're drying off in the late afternoon breeze now. Your chemise stuck to your skin like an old promise, and your hands sore from wringing out salt and sand. Around you, women are doing the same, some sitting on driftwood logs, others laying out shifts on flat rocks, the sun their only dryer. But your mind is turning towards something more tailored. Because tucked inside this world of heavy linen and clever hacks, there's a quieter revolution brewing. Not one declared out loud, heaven forbid, but stitched in secret, hemmed into corners, whispered between laundresses and seamstresses. It's the birth of something we now take for granted, swimwear. Of course, don't picture bikinis or sleek one-pieces. These early garments weren't made for sunbathing. They were stitched for survival, and their creators, women who are tired of dragging half the laundry room into the ocean just to avoid a scandal. You notice her now across the beach, a girl maybe 16, moving freely in the water. Too freely, her chemise isn't floating. It clings only slightly. It looks lighter. You wade over to investigate, because who wouldn't? As you approach, you notice the difference. Her garment is stitched from a tighter weave, shorter than the usual floor-length shifts, and cut just above the ankle. The sleeves are capped instead of full length. The neckline is secured with laces. The hem reinforced with something. Not linen. Probably thin wool. It moves with her, not against her. What is that? You ask. She shrugs. Mother sewed it. Said if the monks want modesty, they can learn to swim first. You laugh harder than you should. Historians still argue whether these early forms of functional sea garments were deliberate prototypes of swimwear, or simply accidental innovations by practical women. What we do know, scraps of wool, blend linen and stitched together undergarments have been found in coastal ruins, showing signs of seawater damage. These weren't decorative clothes. They were used, and that's what makes them revolutionary. Most garments in medieval life were designed for utility, warmth, modesty, durability. But a few began to reflect movement. Clothes that allowed women to step into water without fear of exposure, without drowning, without dragging behind them 6 feet of soggy morality. These garments were rare, experimental, and often hidden, because custom tailoring a bathing outfit bordered on vanity. And vanity, as your local friar will remind you during every sermon between now and Judgment Day, is one hair away from heresy. But some women did. One apothecary's wife in Ghent reportedly wore a fitted wool tunic over her chemise, short-sleeved, flared at the hips, hemmed with leather strips to hold it down. It raised eyebrows and questions. Why so tight? The priest asked. So I don't get pulled under, she replied. Logical, but scandalous. Today's quirky tidbit. A manuscript from 1374 describes a noble woman in Sicily who commissioned a bathing costume of red silk with ivory clasps, possibly the first recorded attempt to make swimwear fashionable. The silk, predictably, disintegrated in the sea, but her style, legendary. Still, for most women, these early swim garments were deeply private projects. You made them yourself or hired a trusted seamstress. You stitched them in twilight hours, using scraps from worn-out dresses. You didn't advertise them. You wore them underneath your proper shift and hoped no one noticed. And when they did notice, you'd better hope they approved. Because a woman in a modified bathing garment could be accused of vanity, pride, or even seduction. Not because she was revealing more, but because she looked like she might move too well in the water. Remember, freedom of movement was suspicious. Dignified women didn't run. They glided. They didn't dive. They dipped. A woman who swam too confidently probably had something to hide. So swimwear, as we know it, had to crawl up from the waves like a shipwrecked idea. Slowly, quietly, you sit back now and wriggle your toes in the sand, thinking of all the women who adjusted, adapted, and stitched back against the current. They weren't trying to make history. They were just trying to float without flashing anyone or sinking, but in doing that and choosing comfort, functionality, and agency over blind obedience, they laid the groundwork for something bigger. Something future generations would embrace with color and confidence. You glance back at the girl in the short wool blend shift. She's swimming, now really swimming. Not just bobbing. Not just kneeling in the surf. She dives under, comes up laughing, her sleeves clinging just enough to prove a point. You wonder if she'll be remembered. Probably not. But that shift, that garment, that quiet defiance, it might just be the beginning of something. You're halfway through the afternoon when it happens. Not to you thank the saints, but to the woman 2 paces down the shore. 1 minute, she's rising gracefully from the water, dress clinging and dripping like usual. The next, a gust of wind catches her damp shift just wrong, and it clings in a way that silence falls across the beach like a drop stone. The crowd doesn't shout. They don't need to. Just a sharp intake of breath, a few quick whispers. And then, the older woman with the tall hat, probably someone's aunt or the local judge's sister, steps forward with the expression of someone about to recite a list of rules. Because this was the fear. This was why you spent 10 minutes tying your belt and adjusting your scarf and whispering prayers to the hem of your dress. The moment of the accidental flasher, the wardrobe malfunction, the public panic. In our time, a slip like that might get a laugh. Maybe a towel. Maybe a blurry photo. In the Middle Ages, it could get you a fine, a lecture, or a new reputation you did not want. Medieval towns were not kind to what they called immodest conduct, especially not when wet linen was involved. You watch the poor woman try to straighten her dress, her fingers fumbling with wet fabric that refuses to obey. A friend hurries over with a second shift and an expression of grim sisterhood. No one's pointing, not out loud, but you know how fast news travels in places where walls are thin and tongues are sharp. This isn't just embarrassment, it's potential moral failure, and that, in this era, can stick harder than salt in wool. Historians still argue over how widespread public penalties were for sea bathing accidents. Some say fines were rare, reserved for actual nudity. Others insist even a flash of calf in the wrong setting could land a woman in front of the parish court. What we do know is that records exist, often scribbled in the margins of town logs, of women being warned, cited, or scolded for disorderly appearance after bathing. The term disorderly could mean anything. A hem above the ankle, a shift clinging too tightly, wet hair worn loose, as though you weren't already begging for divine judgment. And so women did what they always do. They planned. They packed extra layers. They bathed in groups. They stationed a lookout, often a younger cousin or a chatty aunt who didn't like the water anyway. Some even developed coded signals, a raised hand, a tilt of the head to warn each other if a priest was approaching. Tonight's strange but true tidbit. In a coastal town near Bruges, women tied bells to the edges of their outer garments while bathing. Small ones, like those sewn to falcon hoods. If the cloth lifted too high, the bells would ring a modesty alarm. It didn't last long as a trend. Too many seagulls got confused. Still, accidental flashes weren't always accidents. Some women pushed back. Just a little. A looser belt, A shift tied at the side instead of the front. Not enough to get excommunicated. Just enough to remind the world that they were still human, not porcelain icons. Take the tale of Beatrix of Norwich, a merchant's daughter who reportedly wore dyed red linen when she bathed. Not sheer, not tight, but bold. A statement, one that made several matrons clutch their rosaries and at least one bishop sigh audibly. She was fined once for unseemly aquatic display and banned from the beach for a month. But years later, a midwife named her boat after her, because Beatrix wasn't just bold. She was visible. The fear of being seen was drilled deep into medieval women. But beneath that fear, a quiet defiance cold like sea foam. A refusal to disappear just because the fabric clung. You stretch your arms now, your own shift dry at last, and think about how many times a woman might have walked this beach in soaked linen, skin burning with shame or pride or something in between. Not every flash was failure. Some were accident, some were rebellion, and some, though no one would ever admit it aloud, were a moment of truth. A reminder that a body, even covered in sea salt and fear, is still a body, not a symbol, not a sin. The woman who slipped earlier, she's sitting now, wrapped in a dry shawl, laughing with her friend. The moment is past, mostly, but you remember it. Not a shame, as proof that sometimes, even in a world full of rules, the tide gets the last word. The next morning arrives with a hush. The air is thick with sea mist, the kind that clings to your eyelashes and dampens every sound. You walk the familiar path to the shore, bare feet brushing dew wet grass. Today, something strange rumbles just past the dunes, not the crash of waves, but a low mechanical groan. Then you see it, a wooden hut on wheels, boxy, shuttered, with iron-reinforced corners and weight. Yes, it's moving. Dragged by a pair of slow horses, the contraption rolls steadily toward the waterline like a mobile shed with serious ambition. Two women sit inside. You catch a glimpse of linen, of nervous hands clasped in laps, of someone adjusting a bonnet by touch alone. And then, with a creak and a jolt, the cart stops. The door facing the sea opens, and they vanish into the water. Welcome to the world of bathing machines, not a Victorian invention, as many assume, but a practice with medieval roots, at least in concept, if not always in hardware. These early contraptions weren't common, and they weren't cheap. But in the wealthier parts of medieval Europe, particularly around noble estates with seaside holdings, similar mechanisms began to appear. Rolling huts, covered litters, anything to allow women to enter the sea unseen. Privacy wasn't just about modesty. It was about control. The fewer eyes upon you, the fewer judgments. A noble woman couldn't risk being seen waddling into the waves, shift height above the knees, dignity flapping like seaweed. So the solution: bring the changing room to the tide. You step closer to the machine, trailing your fingers along the damp wood. It smells like salt and oak and something faintly metallic. Iron hinges, maybe. Or the quiet tension of secrets. Inside, the air is stale and warm. Two folded stools, a narrow hook for hanging clothes, a rust-straight handle that locks the door from within. You imagine climbing inside, sitting, silent, as the cart lurches forward, the sound of hooves muffled by sand. Then a thud, a click, the sea, waiting just beyond the shutter. And then, if you were daring, a plunge into the unknown. Bathing machines weren't the only unusual method for privacy. In parts of coastal France, wealthier women used tinted rafts, flat wooden platforms lashed to the sand with fabric walls. Think of it as a sea gazebo. You changed inside, then stepped straight into the water from the back. If the tide was kind, even stranger, the horseback method. That's right. In some regions, particularly among noble women with a taste for drama, it became fashionable to ride into the sea on horseback, fully clothed, reins in one hand, a servant on foot to steady the horse. Once waist deep, They dismount carefully, though sometimes not carefully enough, and immerse themselves beside the animal. Historians still debate whether this was genuine bathing or theatrical performance. Some records describe it as ritual purification. Others hint at flirtation. The lines blur. One Flemish poem tells of a lady who rode her mare into Neptune's mouth to cleanse herself of an unwanted suitor. Either metaphor or poor horsemanship. You're a quirky tidbit today. In 14th century Italy, one city council briefly considered banning bathing platforms on moral grounds, not because women were exposed, but because they were too well hidden. Apparently, people were more afraid of what might be happening behind the curtain than what was visible in plain sight. Suspicion, the eternal medieval scent. But it wasn't all nobility and ingenuity. For most women, these machines were an object of both envy and resentment. You overhear whispers from washer women nearby. Must be nice, one says, to bathe without sand in your teeth. I'd take the horses, the other replies. Let them drag me straight to market if it means no one sees my knees. There's laughter, but it's edged. Because the bathing machine isn't just a wooden cot. It's a symbol of class, of privilege, of how far you have to go just to get a moment of peace. You return to the water the old-fashioned way, walking, holding your shift down with one hand, your scarf with the other. The sea doesn't wait for doors or platforms. It greets you like it did yesterday, cold, unapologetic, honest, and as you wade deeper, you glance back at the bathing machine. It's empty now, bobbing slightly in the tide, horses resting nearby. The woman who emerged is walking the shore barefoot, her robe clutched around her. She doesn't look powerful. She looks like you wet, chilled, relieved. Because privacy is a luxury, yes, but sometimes it's also a shield, a way to reclaim something the world keeps trying to take, your space. You breathe deep, the waves rise, and for once, no one is watching, just the sea. You're watching the beach shift into late afternoon light now, golden and drowsy. The waves have grown quieter, less urgent. The tide has started its retreat, exposing tangled ropes of seaweed and tiny shells that sparkle like discarded jewelry. But not everyone is winding down, because here, between the rustling grasses and the whispering surf, secrets bloom like low-tide flowers. You notice it first in a glance, a longer than necessary pause between two women kneeling by a laundry basket. One brushes the other's hand while reaching for a cloth. Innocent, maybe, except neither of them seems in any hurry to finish. Then another, a young man, likely from the other side of the bathing line, tossing a smooth stone just a little too close to the women's side of the shore. He retrieves it with an exaggerated shrug, offers a crooked smile. He's not looking for his rock. Despite the rules, the lines, the sermon shouted from pulpits about the dangers of unguarded moments, people still find each other, especially here, especially when the boundaries feel soft, like the sand under your toes. Because seaside bathing might be watched, separated, and choreographed, but it's also a loophole, a place away from fathers, priests, and watchful town matrons. And where rules press down hard, pressure always builds. Sometimes it's a hidden note pressed into a fold of someone's drying towel. Sometimes it's an agreement made in glances. Meet me by the dunes, just past the third rock, where the tide doesn't reach. Historians still argue whether these moments were widespread or rare sparks in a rigid culture. Some say most women were too afraid of punishment. Others argue that the sea gave cover, noise, movement, distance. In a world with no locked doors for privacy, salt water was the next best thing. You hear whispers from two girls crouched behind a driftwood pile, their laughter hushed, their heads too close together for casual gossip. One of them looks over her shoulder quickly. The other hides something beneath a towel, You don't know what it is. You don't need to, because every corner of this beach seems to hold a side story. It wasn't just romance. Sometimes it was friendship intense, whispered, and more real than any marriage proposal scrawled on parchment. Sometimes it was defiance, a kiss stolen from someone across the class divide, a shared promise between girls from rival families, a message passed in the reed basket of bath oils. And yes, sometimes it was love, or the closest thing to it people could afford when their futures were already stitched by someone else's hand. You pass a cluster of women combing their wet hair with bone combs. One of them, no older than 17, hums a song you don't know but somehow recognize. It's low, rhythmic, and carries just enough melancholy to make you think of someone far away. She pauses, glances out toward the deeper water, and the hum fades. Maybe she was waiting for someone. Maybe she knows they're not coming. But she sang anyway. And then, the parasols. They dot the beach now like soft-colored mushrooms. Shades of ivory, pale rose, even slate blue. Mostly carried by noble women. Yes, but not always used to block the sun. You notice how they turn slightly, slowly, shielding faces not from brightness but from view. A parasol angled just so can let two people talk without being seen, can hide a note, a blush, a moment. They are privacy on a stick. And of course, there are the games. Not childish games, strategic ones. A girl might accidentally step too far into the men's tide zone. Another might pretend she's lost her hair ribbon, asking for help with just enough hesitation to keep things plausible. And then there's the oldest trick in the book, the sea rescue. A stumble, a slip, a dramatic gasp, and suddenly someone's helping someone else out of the surf, dripping, breathless, hand pressed gently to him. It's a scene played out so often that by the time a beach matron storms over, everyone's already pretending nothing happened. Tonight's quirky detail, in a seaside town along the coast of northern Spain, the 15th century local law explicitly forbade intentional aquatic entrapment of the opposite sex under false distress. That's right, sea flirting was such a trend. It had to be banned. And yet, how do you stop something as soft as intention? You walk along the high tide line now, footprints vanishing behind you. The wind has picked up again. So have the secrets. One woman is writing something in the sand with a stick. Letters that vanish before you can read them. Another tucks a seashell into the fold of her friend's shift. No one speaks, because even if you can't say it out loud, you can say it here, where the sea doesn't keep records, where the tide, like a good conspirator, erases everything before morning. You return the next day with your shift tide high and your curiosity even higher. The tide is out, leaving wide ribbons of wet sand and tide pools that mirror the sky. But you're not here for the seaweed or the crabs today. You're here for status. Because, as it turns out, sea bathing in the Middle Ages wasn't just about cleanliness or modesty. It was also about climbing socially, not just into the waves. You spot them first. The noble women. They don't huddle like the others. They're arranged, positioned like stone carvings in a cathedral frieze. Each one in a drying gown, heavy with embroidery. Hair wrapped not in cloth, but in gauze-thin linen that glistens when it catches the sun. They didn't walk here. They were delivered by carriage, litter, or bathing machine. Their handmaidens hold parasols over them. Their towels are trimmed with imported thread. Their sandals aren't hide scraps, they're polished leather, custom cut to avoid tan lines. This isn't bathing, this is performance. And the audience, everyone. Sea bathing had become, in some places and among some classes, a visible ritual of health and refinement. A noble woman who bathed at the shore wasn't just avoiding illness. She was signaling that she had the leisure, the servants, and the knowledge to do so properly. To be pale, perfumed, and damp in exactly the right proportions. Historians still argue over when this shift happened, pun fully intended. Some suggest it began with the translation of Greek medical texts into Latin, when classical ideas about balance and saltwater healing took on a new medieval twist. Others believe it was a matter of envy. As nobles began visiting coastal estates more often, local women imitated their habits, first for health, then for style, then for identity. The irony, many of these noble women never actually went into the water. They'd be carried to the edge, dip their feet, perhaps kneel, splash their wrists, then retreat. The shift always made a finer fabric than yours might not even get wet beyond the hem. But it asterisk had to look wet. It had to shimmer and cling just enough to show that it had kissed the sea. And that shimmer, that damp curve of linen against a shoulder, it became a kind of status symbol. You find yourself watching one such woman now. Her shift is embroidered with tiny sea creatures, starfish, eels, something that might be a merman. It's stitched in silver thread. She wears it like a tapestry, letting it catch the light as she turns. You try not to stare. She notices anyway, gives you a slow, deliberate smile. Then there's the scent. Noble bathers were known to mix dried herbs, lavender, sage, mint into their drying cloths. Some even added rose oil to their bath water if they used private barrels near the shore. The result? They didn't just emerge clean. They emerged fragrant, carried on the wind like sanctified laundry. Tonight's curious detail: in parts of southern France, women of high status competed in what was effectively a wet shift parade. After their sea immersion, they would stroll along the upper beach path, letting their damp garments cling artfully while appearing to ignore the attention they drew. The winner, unofficially, was the one who looked the most refreshed asterisk without seeming to have tried asterisk. And so women of low classes adapted in the only way they could, by mimicking. They might add a splash of wine to their rinse water to imitate the scent of herbal oils. They sewed scraps of ribbon into their shift hems. They carried their best sandals and changed into them right after bathing. Never mind the seaweed still stuck between their toes. For these women, the sea became a rare chance to play nobility. For a few hours, their damp hair and pale cheeks let them blend, just a little, with those who rode in non-carriages. But the line was always there. One washerwoman, Johanne of Calais, once dared to wear a shift made of borrowed damask to a public bathing day. It shimmered blue in the sun. For 20 minutes, she was mistaken for a minor baroness's cousin. Then the real cousin arrived, and Johanne was banned from the beach for a month. The charge? Pretending at rank. Not theft, not nudity, just aspiration. You sit now on a flat rock, your own shift dry in patches, your hair tied up in a rush. A noble woman pauses, her maid brushing sand from her ankle. She doesn't look at you, not directly, but she sees you, and you wonder not whether she's better, not whether you envy her, but whether she's free. Because for all the luxury, all the scent and silver, her bathing is bound by spectacle. Every movement weighed, every gesture rehearsed, and when she returns to her estate, she'll be asked who was there, what she wore, whether her shift dried evenly. Whereas you can still walk into the sea without permission. That's a kind of status too. The sky is clouding over now, soft and streaky, like an old wool blanket drawn slowly across the light. The beach has thinned. Fewer voices, fewer splashes, just the long, lazy hush of wind brushing the dunes, and the faint call of gulls that don't care for rules or ropes. You draw your shawl tighter, not just because the wind has teeth, but because today's thoughts are heavier, more solemn. Because while some came to the sea to cure humors or flash silver-threaded shifts, others came with a different weight: guilt. Medieval life was steeped in faith, and faith came with consequences. You sinned, you repented, you paid, and sometimes That payment involved the sea. It wasn't official doctrine, not exactly, but in places where holy water ran low and shame ran high, the ocean became a kind of alternative baptismal font. A priest might not say it directly, but a widow weeping too long, a young girl whispered to have drawn the wrong sort of glances, or a barren woman desperate for blessing each might be encouraged to take the waters, not to heal the body, to cleanse the soul. Historians still argue whether these cleansings were symbolic or disciplinary. Some point to clerical records in coastal abbeys that reference salt ablutions. Others argue these moments were personal, passed down through local law and midwife wisdom. You remember the older woman you saw 3 days ago, the one humming in the waves. You saw her again this morning alone, eyes closed, mouth moving, one hand pressed flat to her chest. She was not rinsing away sand. She was confessing, and she wasn't alone. In some comments, particularly in Ireland and Brittany, it's said that novices were taken to the sea for a ritual submersion before their vows. Not recorded, not confirmed, but whispered in the letters of abbesses to one another. She is ready. The tide has touched her. The church walked a fine line. It preached that salvation came through God, not brine. But when local beliefs and church authority collided, a quiet compromise often emerged. A priest might bless the sea. A monk might supervise from the dunes. The sea would do the rest. But this wasn't always voluntary. Some women were sent to the waves with no words of comfort. A rumor to sharp, a secret to loud, and suddenly a cleansing became penance. You've heard the stories. A girl made to walk into the sea at dawn, alone, while townsfolk watched from a distance, eyes averted but ears wide open. No one says it was punishment. No one needs to. Tonight's haunting tidbit. In a fishing village in Cornwall, there's a stone half buried in the sand with no name, just a carved wave curling inward. Local legend claims it marks the spot where a woman was told to walk into the tide and pray until it either forgave her or took her. No records survive, only the stone and a story. And then there were the places where the sea was holy on purpose. Springs that emptied into salt bays. Caves where saints were said to have meditated. Beaches with crosses planted upright in the sand, facing east. Here, the water was not feared, it was revered. Women came to these places not to hide their shame, but to release it. They wore white shifts and sang as they entered. Chants passed down mother to daughter. Some wove reeds into belts. Others carried scallop shell symbols of pilgrimage and renewal. These weren't punishments. These were promises. You spot two women now walking side by side into the surf. No talking, just quiet footsteps. One reaches down and releases something into the tide. A ribbon, maybe. A folded cloth, maybe just a handful of tears held too long. You want to ask what they left behind, but you already know. Because the sea, for all its crashing chaos, holds secrets better than any confessional. You sit now on the same rock as yesterday, the one that's dry on one side and slick on the other. You watch the sky bruise darker, and you listen, not for voices, for what comes after. The sea is calm, unbothered. It doesn't care if you were faithful or furious, chaste or curious. It doesn't count how many times you wade in or what sins you bring with you. It just pulls them away. And maybe, for a moment, that was all some women needed. Not forgiveness, just a place where nobody asked what they were washing off. The evening is almost still now. The wind reduced to a breath, the waves speaking in soft syllables. You step once more onto the cooling sand, shift brushing your calves, and the sea meets you with the patience of something that has seen every secret, heard every prayer, and never once spoken them aloud. This time, you aren't hurrying to bathe, or avoiding eyes, or watching noble women compare embroidery. You're here to stand quietly in the water and witness something change. Because it is changing. For centuries, women have stepped into the sea with their heads down and their sleeves rolled tight. They've done it with shame, with hope, with defiance stitched into their hems. But now, in this sleek medieval hour, something is beginning to lift. The rules are still there. The priests still preach. The lines between men's and women's shores are still drawn with salt and suspicion. But the way women are moving is different. Not all of them, not loudly, but enough to notice. They hold their heads a little higher as they enter the tide. Their garments, while still modest, are a touch more practical. Shorter sleeves, tighter seams, shifts that whisper of intentional design instead of default expectation. Historians still debate when modesty gave way to mobility. Some argue it wasn't until the 18th century. Others point to patterns already forming in the late Middle Ages. Moments like these, when women started choosing function over fear. You see it here. One woman swimming, not just dipping or kneeling, but swimming. Her arms pull through the water with the steady rhythm of someone unafraid. Her chemise clings like sea foam, not armor. No one scolds her. One or two glance, one nods, another wrings out her shaft without trying to hide her silhouette. Another sings as she floats, alone, toes up to the sky. There's a new silence on the beach, not heavy with judgment, but open, like a held breath before something begins. Even the noble women seem changed. Their parasols are fewer, their gestures looser. One young baroness lets her hair loose after bathing, and no one faints. Her handmaidens look at each other, then do the same. No one says it, but something's ending or beginning. You sit beside a woman combing her hair with her fingers. She's older than your aunt, your midwife, your oldest teacher. Her skin is a roadmap, her eyes full of tide. She says nothing, just watches the sea like it owes her something. Or maybe it gave her something she hasn't told anyone about. She hums, low and cracked, like a song half remembered. And beside her, girls just coming of age braid each other's hair, compare soaked ribbons, trade glances with boys they're not supposed to know by name. They don't whisper about curses or fines or the priest's glare. They're whispering about possibility. Even the bathing machines, those rolling boxes of borrowed privacy, are being eyed with something like irony. One girl points to one, giggles, and asks, "What's the point if you still come out wet?" Her mother frowns. Her grandmother chuckles, because the tide is turning, not in big waves, but in gentle shifts. In linen stitched with strength instead of fear, in ankles shown without apology, in shoulders braced not against shame, but for swimming. Tonight's final curious detail. There's a record from the 1490s of a woman in Scotland who asked her tailor for a bathing robe with sleeves shortened and breast tied in the Roman way. Not quite a bikini, but maybe the first documented request for a bathing outfit designed for the body in motion, not hidden stillness. You wonder what she felt when she stepped into the sea wearing it. Probably cold, probably free. You rise now, feet wet again, the shore behind you blurred in shadow. The sea has done what it always does, pull things in, then let them go. And standing here, you finally feel it. The weight of all the women who bathed before you, quiet, trembling, brave, falls away. And in its place, something lighter rises. Not just salt or steam, but something like permission to be here, to move, to let the waves touch your skin and not apologize for it. The sky has deepened now into a blanket of quiet blue, stitched at the edges with stars. The sea is dark and still, a mirror that reflects the slow blink of constellations overhead. The beach, once full of voices and movement, has emptied into silence. Only the waves remain, brushing the shore like a lullaby, gentle and endless. You lie back on the sand, still damp, still warm in patches where the sun kissed it not long ago. Your shift clings in places, soft in others. The scent of salt is fainter now, mixed with cool air and the faint sweetness of seagrass. You hear the last gull cry fade into the distance. Even the wind has forgotten its sharpness. Close your eyes. The women who stood here before you hesitant, laughing, weeping, daring have all gone home. But the water remembers every footstep, every prayer, every unspoken thought given to the tide. The sea carries it all, not as judgment, but as memory. You breathe slowly, in and out. Let the shore hold you. Let the stars watch over you. There is nothing more to be done tonight. No hems to adjust. No rules to follow. No glances to dodge. Only rest. Only quiet. Only the hush of old waves touching old stones. And as your thoughts drift, soft and heavy, know this: you were seen, you were heard, and you were not alone.